Now the next portion is the anatomy of heart. Now here we need to know about the little pumping organ which circulates the blood in the entire body. Before we go further, let us also see the varied type of heart and their systems across the animal kingdom. Now starting with the two-chambered heart. So what does a two-chambered heart means? Now it means there are only two chambers, one auricle and one ventricle, and they both are connected with a single valve. Now how does it work? Now this kind of heart is present in aquatic animals, especially in fishes, which pushes the blood right from one of the chamber to another chamber. Now what happens? It involves only one circuit where the blood from the heart, it goes to gills, right? And from gills it gets oxygenated and then it is supplied to the body, and finally this blood goes back to the heart. Now so there involves only a single loop in it to do all the kind of tasks. So this is only possible because these animals are exclusively aquatic. Now coming to the other kind of hearts. Now during the evolution, what happens that animals move from water to land. Now as they move to land, the pressure with which blood is pushed to the body, the pressure decreases tremendously. So now there is a need of such a kind of heart that can pump blood more efficiently. So in course of time, what has happened, which we have seen that there were two chambers which are connected to a valve. Now these initial chamber, which is known as atria, is further separated, okay, which leads to development of three chamber, 1, 2 and 3. So that is, there are two atria and one ventricle. Now this is seen in exclusive terrestrial animals also, three-chambered heart. Now here the blood circulation is divided into two loops. Now in this kind of heart, what happens? There are two atria. So from heart, one loop goes into the lungs and getting back to the heart, and this is the oxygenated part, right? And this oxygenated blood then is again sent to the body and then returned to the heart. So there are two loops, one which goes to the lungs and get back to the heart, and the other one, this oxygenated blood is taken by the body, that is the second loop. So this kind of system is seen in the land animals. Now as they need more pressure in the blood to supply to all parts of the body. Now coming to the last type of the heart seen in animal kingdom is the four-chambered heart. Now what does that mean? That is, now again there were two chambers in the atria which was seen in the animals which moved to the land. Now again there is further separation of the ventricles into two parts. So complete development, complete partitioning of the chamber was seen. So there were two atria and two ventricles. Now, but if reptiles and mammals both are terrestrial, why does this difference exist? Why mammals and birds need this additional fourth chamber? Now, it is due to the reason that birds and mammals, these birds and mammals, they are warm-blooded animals, right? On the other hand, if we see amphibians and reptiles, they are cold-blooded animals, right? So now these warm-blooded animals need complete partitioning of their chambers because they don't need any mixing of the blood. Why? Because they need to conserve their energy in order to maintain their body temperature. So due to this partitioning, the circulatory system becomes more efficient, that can maintain the body temperatures constant. Let's now move to the anatomy of the champion heart. Now, what is this? This is not the heart I am talking about, which is generally fantasized as the center of feeling and emotions. But then who controls our feeling of emotions? Then it is this thing. Yes, this is the brain which controls our emotions. Heart is, in fact, a remarkable pump one has ever seen. A heart is equal to the person fist, which makes sense that a bigger person needs a bigger heart. Heart is a cone-shaped structure, as one can see, and it sits in the medial cavity, slightly shifted towards the left side of the thorax in the mediastinum cavity. So this is the mediastinum cavity and it sits just above the diaphragm. So here is the diaphragm and it is just sitting above it. Now when we look at the heart, it is packed inside a fluid cavity which is known as pericardium. So here you can see the layer shown in white is the pericardium. Now this pericardium is absolutely sticking to it. Inside it, the pericardium, the heart is again made up of three layers which are known as epicardium, myocardium and endocardium. Now let's look at the chambers of the heart, right? So the heart has four chambers, four of them are there, two atria and two ventricles. Now these two atria, so here right atrium and left atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. Now what does this atrium means? Atrium means the entryway. So atria are the receiving chambers of the heart where oxygen poor blood enters through the right one through the different veins. Now there are two kinds of vein which supply to the atria. These are the vena cava. So one can see a superior vena cava. Here it is. And the other one is the inferior vena cava. Here it is. Here is the inferior vena cava. Both these vena cava supply the right atrium with the blood. Superior vena cava is known as superior because it is supplying the blood from the upper parts of the body, while this inferior vena cava is collecting the blood from the lower parts of the body. There are one more part which is supplying the right atrium with the blood is the coronary sinus, which collects the blood draining from the myocardium itself, that is the blood coming from the heart. These two atria are separated by an interatrial septum, that is the septum which is dividing the two atria into complete two chambers. Now from the atria, the blood moves to the ventricles. Much of the volume, as we can see, is occupied by the ventricles, that is the right ventricle and the left ventricle. The volume is comparatively larger than the atrium. Now these are also known as the actual pumps, as these ventricles, when they contract, the blood is pumped out of the heart into the circulation, those being the right ventricle and the left ventricle. The ventricles are also separated by a septum known as interventricular septum. So you can see this is a partitioning which is dividing these two ventricles separately. Now the right ventricle sends blood to the pulmonary trunk. So here you can see right ventricle is supplying blood to the pulmonary trunk which goes to the lung, and left ventricle sends blood to aorta, which is the artery that is the largest one in the body. Now the blood is circulated into two circuits, that is the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. Let us understand the two. As the name suggests, pulmonary circuit is the circuit which involves lung. So it is the circuit which is taking the blood to the lungs. So here is the portion which is carrying the blood to the lungs and finally getting back to the heart again. This circulation is known as pulmonary circulation. And the other part is the one which is collecting blood from the body parts, getting back to the heart and finally sending the oxygenated blood to the body. So this circulation is known as systemic circulation. So the oxygenated blood from the lungs enter the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins. So it is entering from the pulmonary veins, and the deoxygenated part is carried by the pulmonary artery. So pulmonary artery to the lungs to pulmonary vein complete the pulmonary circuit. Then the oxygenated blood leaves the left side of the heart, right? So here the oxygenated part of the blood is leaving the left side of the heart, sent throughout the body and deliver the oxygen and nutrients to various tissues. The blood makes it back to the right side of the heart, thus completing the systemic circuit. So this is how the systemic circuit gets completed. Systemic blood in circulation has more blood vessels. So this part of the system is involving more blood vessels and 5 times more resistance to blood flow. That is why left is more stronger. So this Myocardium is of the left side is 3 times thicker. Very interesting thing is that which artery supplies to the heart and which takes away the blood from it. There is coronary artery and coronary veins that supplies blood to heart need just like any other organ. Moving to the next part of the heart is the heart valves. Let us discuss where they are present and what is their need. Valves are needed to ensure the unidirectional flow of the blood, that is from atria to ventricles, ventricles to the veins and arteries. There are two atrioventricular valves, that is the valves which are present between atrium and ventricles. They are known as AV valves. They connect the atrium to the corresponding ventricles. Now these valves are two in number, that is a tricuspid valve and a bicuspid valve. So tricuspid valve is a valve which is present between the right atria and right ventricle. It is known as tricuspid valves because it contains 3 flaps. The valve is attached with the walls of the ventricle with the help of a ligaments known as chordae tendineae. Similarly, the valve between the left atria and left ventricle is known as bicuspid valve due to the presence of 2 flaps. It is also known as the mitral valve. These valves remain open and the blood flows through when the atria relaxes. When the ventricles contract, these valves closes due to change in the pressure. So these gets closed and ventricles pushes the blood through the corresponding veins and arteries. Now then there are other 2 valves which are known as semilunar valves. So as we had discussed earlier also that these semilunar valves are present in the veins, right? So these are the aortic valve and the pulmonary valves. So here you can see the 2 valves. These valves basically prevent the blood backflow in the ventricles. Moving to the physiology of heart, let's understand what do you mean by the cardiac cycle. Now we need to understand, before getting this understanding how a heart pumps the blood, it is incomplete to understand the circulatory system. Now we all know that heart sounds like lub dub lub dub. Now this is known as heartbeat. So we need to keep beating for our survival. So let's understand what is this heartbeat. Now heartbeat can be broken down into 2 parts, systole and diastole. Systole means pumping and diastole means filling. The first sound is lub, which is due to the tricuspid and bicuspid that snap shut upon the contraction of ventricles. So here you can see this time the ventricles are contracting and at the same time you can see these 2 valves, bicuspid and tricuspid, are getting closed. So due to their shutting down, the fast action where they shut upon, which is occurring at the same time, and this period is known as the systole. At the same time, this is opening the aortic and pulmonary valve also. So here you can see the opening of the aortic and pulmonary valve. So one can see the here, right? So this is the period of systole. Now the next sound is dub, which comes when both pulmonary and aortic valves get closed. So what happens? The first sound is systole when these tricuspid and bicuspid valves get closed. When the aortic and pulmonary valves get closed, now here you can see, here they are getting opened, and when they close at this point, they ends the systole. Right after this, tricuspid and bicuspid valves open up, which allows filling of the ventricle. This is known as diastole. So this is the complete cardiac cycle, how the diastole and systole is being maintained. Now systolic blood pressure is the pressure in the arteries and diastolic is the pressure with which the ventricles are filling the blood. So it is obvious that it is slightly lower pressure. So let's understand with the help of a schematic how does the things are taking place. So what happens when the atrial systole begins? The atrial contraction which forces the blood to get inside the ventricles, right? Now what happens in the next phase? So this is the atrial systole which is taking place, which is contracting the atria, filling in the ventricles. The next phase is the ventricular systole where ventricles are getting contracted At the same time, the tricuspid and bicuspid valves are getting closed. This is creating the sound of lup. They are pushing, due to the contraction of the ventricle, there is a push for these semilunar valves to get open, and they are pushing the blood outside of the heart through ventricles. Now the next phase, second phase of the ventricle systole, where the semilunar valves gets open and blood is ejected out. Now as soon as the semilunar valves get closed, there is the production of another sound, heart sound, known as dup, and this allows the blood flows back into the atria and start filling. This leads to the relaxation of the ventricles, and the chambers relax and blood fills ventricles passively. So this is how the cardiac cycle gets completed. Let's now move to the cardiac impulse. We need to understand the guy behind this pulsating thing. What is there which initiates these contraction and relaxations? So the heart is basically a muscular structure that contracts and pushes the blood or pumps the blood. Now it consists of specialized muscle cells known as cardiac myocytes. There is a remarkable thing about the heart of its automaticity and intrinsic cardiac contraction. Automaticity means it can excite itself without the need of the nervous system. So let's see how this cardiac conduction is being mediated. Now heart contains specialized myocytes which are known as pacemaker cells. Now these are present in SA node. So these are the primary pacemaker cells of the heart which initiates the heartbeat and controls the heart rate as well. The contraction of these cells is initiated by electric impulses which are known as action potential. So let's understand this with the help of a schematic diagram. So here is the SA node. So this is the one which initiates this heartbeats. Now the excitations are very rapid since these myocytes, so these all are connections between these myocytes, and these all cells are connected with the help of gap junctions. And there is an electrical coupling between these neighboring cells, due to which the signaling becomes very fast. Now the SA node, cells of the SA node spontaneously fire about 70 to 80 action potentials per minute, which is generating an average heartbeat of 70 to 80 beats per minute. Next, the electrical impulses, they are traveling from the SA node through a conduction system where they need, from here, they are reaching to the atrioventricular node. These are the two pathways. So these are responsible for the contraction of atria. Let's see through the animation how this thing is being carried out. So now the SA node is sending impulses to the AV node, and it is responsible for the contraction of the atria. Now then the connection is followed by the conduction pathway which spread across the ventricular myocytes. So here one can see the myocytes which are spreading across the ventricles. Now the signaling is being sent to these ventricular myocytes. Now there are certain specialized cells which are known as Purkinje fibers. So here you can see these are the special fibers which distribute the impulse throughout the heart and initiate the contraction from within. So to ensure the contraction that is perfectly coordinated. So Purkinje fibers, these are larger than the ordinary muscle fibers. One can see these are very big, and their sarcoplasm is occupied by glycogen. So let's see this through an animation how this is being mediated. So now through the conduction pathway, these are being sent to the ventricular myocytes spreading through the Purkinje fibers which are letting the ventricles to contract in a coordinated manner. So this is the conduction pathway which involves the sinoatrial node from where the impulses are being generated, which are spread through the atrioventricular node which are responsible for the contraction of atria. Then these signals are sent to the bundle of His which are spreading through the septum, interventricular septum, and finally the signals are being carried to the Purkinje fibers which are specialized fibers for maintaining the coordinated contraction of the ventricles. Moving to the final part of the cardiac cycle, that is electrocardiogram or simply ECG. So ECG is an diagnostic tool in medicine which is used to detect and record the electrical activity of the heart. Now electrical signals begins at the SA node, just we have seen that, and they travel to right atria and then simultaneously to the left atria, causing them to contract, and which leads to the pumping of the blood to the ventricles. Now this electrical activity is recorded as P wave. So here you can see when this is being taking place, that is the signals are generated at SA node, which is making both the atria to contract. This is responsible for the generation of P wave. Now the PR interval, that is the time between the P wave and the R wave. So here is the R wave. Now it is the beginning of the P wave. It is the interval or the time between the P wave to begin the QRS complex. Now as the signal pass through AV node, right? Now the signals are passing through AV node. They allow the ventricles to fill in. This appears as a flat line. So you can see the interval between the two is seen as a flat line because now at this time the ventricles are filling in. And this is the start of the Q wave. So you can see this is the start of the Q wave. Now PR represents the electrical conduction through the atria. So what it is representing? This PR is representing the electrical conduction through atria and delay in the electrical impulse in atrioventricular node. Now after the signal leaves AV node, now the signal has left the AV node and it travels to the bundle of His. Now it is traveling here. Alright. So as it travels to the bundle of His, now what will be taking place? The ventricles will start contracting, right? Now this signal records the QRS wave. So when this is taking place, making the ventricles to contract, it is generating the QRS wave on ECG. And this is a very rapid signal. Soon the ventricles recover the normal electrical state. They will be back to their normal electrical state, and it is the T wave. Now the T wave is being generated when they are back to their normal electrical activity. So you can see now they are already in their relaxed state and it is leading to the generation of the T wave. This allows atria to fill the blood. Coming to the last segment, that is the ST segment connects the QRS with the T wave that represents the electrical recovery of the ventricles. Finally, coming to the QT wave, it is the interval which represents the time during which the ventricles are stimulated. This QT interval, that is the time during which the ventricles are stimulated and recovered after the stimulation. So in the next video, we will be discussing about the human excretory system.